Monaca 5601973-74. Monaca is the name of a French luxury automobile produced in the commune of Balbigny in the department of Loire between 1972 and 1974, of which just 40 cars were reported to have been made. The Monaca 560 V8 was at the time considered to be by many automobile aficionados a magnificent French luxury GT and the natural successor of the earlier well-known Facel Vega HK 500 V8 GT, which also has a Chrysler V8 5905cc 16 volts 360 bhp engine, and of which just 490 were produced between 1958 and 1961. The Monaca car was a project of Jean Tastevin, a graduate engineer of École Centrale de Paris. His father Arnaud bought the Atelier at Chantiers de Balbigny in 1930. That company was a manufacturer of mining and railway equipment. In 1955 Jean succeeded his father, becoming chairman and managing director. He renamed the company Compagnie Française de Produits Metallurgiques, or CFPM, and began to specialize in the manufacture and rental of railroad tank cars. The factory where the rolling stock was manufactured operated under a different name, being Compagnie Française de Matériels Ferroviaires, CFMF. The company prospered, eventually coming to have 400 employees. Tastevin was an automobile enthusiast who personally owned cars from Aston Martin and Facel Vega. After Facel Vega shut down in 1964 he bought a Jaguar, but regretted not being able to buy a French-made car of that class. In pursuit of both his interest in cars and a way to diversify his railway business, Tastevin began making plans to launch his own brand of automobile in 1966. He made his longtime assistant, Henri Sicocci, the project manager. He would also set aside a portion of his factory in Balbigny so that the cars could truly be said to be made in France. The car was named in honor of Tastevin's wife, Monique Tastevin. Automotive engineer and racing driver Chris Lawrence's company Lawrence Tune Engines had developed a 2.6-liter version of the standard engine used in the Triumph TR4. Lawrence's version used a cross-flow cylinder head of his own design and Teckel-Jackson fuel injection to make a claimed 182 bhp, 136 kilowatts, bhp. Automotive journalist Jabi Krumbach had seen the engine at the 1966 racing show at Olympia West Hall in London. The article he wrote about it had caught Tastevin's eye. 133 Tastevin wrote to Lawrence asking about having Lawrence Tune supply 250 engines per year for his new car. Upon learning that the car was not yet developed, Lawrence offered the services of his own company. Krumbach, who was familiar with Lawrence's racing exploits, vouched for Lawrence, and Tastevin entrusted development of the Monaca to Lawrence Tune. 134. The first chassis and the jig to produce it were built together. Lawrence laid out a chassis with a central tunnel made of 4 square section 18-gauge steel tubes with extensive cross-bracing. 2 long steel boxes with triangular cross-sections were made of 16-gauge steel and attached to the chassis in the dorsal area. These stiffened the chassis and were also to serve as the car's fuel tanks. 16-gauge aluminum formed the front and rear bulkheads and floors and was used on both sides of the central tunnel to stiffen the car further. Voids in the tunnel were filled with expanded polyurethane foam to add even more stiffness and deaden sound. 135. The front suspension used very tall uprights with the wheel spindles on one side and a short stub axle extending inwards on the other. Springing was by vertically mounted coil-over damper units mounted inboard and operated through rocker-style upper arms. The lower arms were conventional wide-based wishbones made of a one-piece wishbone and long radius arm running back towards the bulkhead. Steering was rack and pinion mounted high, at the same level as the upper wishbone. The rear suspension was a Dion system with coil springs, 2 parallel leading links on each side and a panhard rod. The differential was from the Rover P6B, also known as the Rover 3500, with a crown and pinion made by Hewland, but with an additional nose piece that gave the option of 2 rear axle ratios, a high numeric ratio for in town and a low numeric ratio for high-speed cruising. 290. A lever in the cockpit allowed the ratio to be changed while in motion. braking was provided by a dual-circuit power-assisted Lockheed and Girling system with 12-inch vented discs in front and 10-inch solid disc brakes in the rear. The rear brakes were mounted inboard and the front brakes were mounted to the stub axle on the front upright, which brought them out of the wheels and into the airstream for cooling. As the prototype chassis was nearing completion, Lawrence began to have second thoughts about using the Lawrence Tune, standard Triumph engine. Lawrence knew that the Triumph engine was to be phased out of production by 1967. He also felt that this relatively heavy, rough, and noisy engine was not appropriate for a new luxury car. 137. Lawrence put Tasteven in touch with Edward C. Ted Martin, who had designed an engine that Lawrence thought would work well in the Monica. After evaluating the engine, Tasteven bought the design, rights and existing tooling for Ted Martin's engine. The agreement included 4 complete 3.0-liter engines. 138. The Martin engine was an all-alloy V8 with a single overhead camshaft, sock, per bank driven by a toothed belt, originally Gilmer belt, see also timing belt. Designed for the new 3-liter limit announced for the 1966 Formula One season, it weighed just 230 pounds, 100 kilograms, with ancillaries and produced 270 bhp, 200 kilowatts at 7,000 revolutions per minute. An unusual feature of the Martin V8 was that 4 of the connecting rods were forked at the big end, much like those on the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. 156. The connecting rod for the opposing cylinder bore fit into the gap of the forked rod. This meant that the cylinder banks were not offset on the crank line, reducing overall engine length. The engine was used in the Pierce Martin F1 car as well as the Lucas Martin, a modified Lotus 35 Formula 2 frame that was run briefly in Formula 1. It also appeared in 2.8-liter form in some specials, including some of Lawrence's own Deep Sanderson sports and racing cars. This initial prototype first ran at Silverstone in 1968 without bodywork. The drivetrain for the car was a 3-liter Martin V8 driving through a Triumph TR4 gearbox with overdrive. The car weighed 1,070 kilograms. Overall performance was good, but the testing uncovered problems with the engine and its lack of road car ancillaries. Bodywork for the first prototype was fabricated by Morriscom. 139. This car was very different in appearance from the subsequent prototypes and the production models and has been compared to an oversized Banhart CD. Neither Tasteven nor his wife were happy with the appearance of the first prototype. A second prototype chassis was built and sent to Williams and Pritchard, who produced a body for it in aluminum. The style of this body was much more angular than the first. Tasteven personally requested some last-minute changes to the shape which would be undone in later prototypes, but in general prototype number 2 set the general direction for subsequent bodies. 152. This second car was registered as a Deep Sanderson and given registration number 2 ARX. After its use as a development mule, prototype number 2 was used as a personal car by team member Colin James, after which it was acquired by Peter Dodds, another member of the Monica team. In 1969, prototype chassis number 3, the first to receive a ZF 5-speed manual transmission, was built. At this time the Tastevens introduced tutor, Tony Rascanu, a Romanian exile and former shop manager for Vignale in Italy, to the project. Rascanu was entrusted with the job of completely restyling the bodywork for the third prototype, but was not allowed to make any modifications to Lawrence's chassis, which was to be sent to French coach builder Henri Chapron in Paris. Chapron was to build a full-sized maquette, or body form, of the revised car under Rascanu's oversight. 154. Rascanu and Capron's work met with Tasteven's approval. With hidden headlamps in a sloping aerodynamic nose and wide horizontal taillights, it was much more appealing than the previous 2 attempts. The maquette was then sent to Carrozzeria Alfredo Vignale in Turin to be used as a base for Vignale to produce a body in steel. Before delivering the maquette to Vignale, Tasteven asked Lawrence to first deliver prototype number 2 to the workshops of Virgilio Canrero, also in Turin. The famous Alpha mechanic was to do a detailed assessment of the Martin engine and evaluation of the car's performance. 156 Conrero was critical of almost every aspect of the Martin engine and was skeptical of the power curves provided by Lawrence. 156 He told the factory this engine is a trap that will never work under normal traffic conditions. Conrero insisted on a flying kilometer test of the prototype, after which he would run his 2-liter Julietton on the same course for comparison. Lawrence suspected that Conrero was trying to discredit both the Martin engine and Lawrence tune in an attempt to take Lawrence's place on the Monica project. He examined the times recorded for the Monica's run and discovered an irregularity in the numbers. When Tastevan confronted Conrero with this information, the testing was halted and Conrero's involvement in the project ended. 157 Lawrence delivered chassis number 3 to Vignale's Carrozzeria, and they completed the body in steel. While prototype number 3 was a significant improvement, the Tastevans were not yet entirely satisfied with its appearance. Performance of this car was also disappointing due to it being between 200 kilograms, 440 pounds, and 250 kilograms, 550 pounds, overweight. By way of explanation, Lawrence drilled a hole into the scuttle. The drill penetrated 13 mm, 0.5 in, of lead. 158 Vignale, in the meantime, sold his company to De Tomaso in December 1969 and died 3 days later in an automobile accident while driving a Maserati. During the May 1968 events in France, Tastevan decamped the entire staff of CFPM to Geneva and tasked Lawrence to keep the Monica project going. Tastevan provided Lawrence with funding to find subcontractors to build cars in England. 159 Lawrence approached Jensen, who he knew were already building cars for Sunbeam, Volvo and Austin Healey as well as their own CV8s and Interceptors. Jensen was not set up to produce the body panels though. Panels for their other assembly contracts came from outside of the company. Lawrence took prototype number 3 and went looking for someone to provide the panels. He found a company named Airflow Streamline in Luton that specialized in producing aluminum cabs for trucks. Airflow only asked for a complete set of engineering drawings, a chassis and the number of body panels that Lawrence would require. 160 Chassis number 4 and number 6 were delivered to Airflow Streamline and Rascanu was installed there to supervise the production of the necessary drawings. Another subcontractor would be needed to supply the engines. 2 possibilities presented themselves. One was Coventry Victor, and the other was Rolls-Royce. Lawrence had heard that Rolls-Royce had recently idled one of their production facilities due to the loss of a contract and might be interested in taking on the Martin V8 project. 160 Lawrence met with representatives from Rolls-Royce, who were fascinated by the small size of the Martin V8 and intrigued by the forked connecting rods so reminiscent of those in Rolls-Royce's own Merlin. Rolls-Royce subsequently won another defense contract which would reactivate the previously idled plant and bowed out of negotiations. Lawrence went back to Coventry Victor. In the intervening time things had settled down in Paris, and Tastevan wanted to move the project along quickly. Chassis number 5 was sent to the factory in Balbini while Lawrence set about establishing a machine shop at Lawrence Tune Engines able to produce the engines as well. Problems with castings coming from a company called Birmingham Alloys prompted Lawrence to have Tastevan search his contacts in the French aluminum industry for an alternative supplier, settling on a company called Montepet. 163 Airflow Streamline was still without their technical drawings and was not getting any information out of Paris. It turned out that Rascanu, sadly, had died in 1970 before being able to complete the drawings. Lawrence met with Airflow Streamline to discuss the changes they wanted in the maquette and Lawrence convinced Airflow to build 2 bodies on the 2 chassis they had using prototype number 3, which would be left there, as a structural guide. The car they would produce, prototype number 4, would be Lawrence's favorite Monica of all. 168 David Coward was hired from Autocar magazine where he was working as an illustrator. 166 Prior to that he had worked at coach builder James Young. Coward refined Rascanu's design by lowering the side window line and deepening the windscreen to give the car a more contemporary appearance. The body was also lowered 3 inches between the floor pan and the roof, and 4 inches were added to the width. After sorting out some issues with prototype number 4, attention turned to tooling. Tooling to produce the bodywork in aluminum turned out to be prohibitively expensive, but a company named Abate was found in Turin that would make tooling out of resin that would be able to produce up to 100 body sets in steel. The price for the set would be 100,000.169. When the unrest in Paris had subsided, the idea of contracting out production of the car had ended, but Tasteven had kept Coventry Victor under contract to produce the engines. They had been asked to produce 25 copies of the engine in a 2.8-liter displacement. Coventry Victor was only able to produce 18 engines before declaring bankruptcy. 170. At the same time, Lawrence had pressed ahead with producing the engines at Lawrence Tune headquarters in England. Tests of the 2.8-liter engine led him to believe that this version was underpowered for the car, and so he enlarged his. 170 with displacement increased to 3,423 cc, fed by 4 2-barrel Weber 40 DCL and downdraft carburetors, and the Monica name and script cast into its valve covers. The revised engine produced 240 bhp, 180 kilowatts at 6,000 revolutions per minute. While maximum torque wasn't produced until 4,000 revolutions per minute, the torque curve was relatively flat from 2,500 to 4,000 revolutions per minute. Eventually the technical drawings were completed and approved by Tasteven, which Lawrence delivered to Turin along with prototype number 4 so that production of the body panels using the resin steel hybrid tooling could begin. Comparisons have been drawn between the final shape of the Monica and many of its contemporaries, with the front view having been compared to the Maserati Indy and Lotus Elan Plus 2, the rear to the Ferrari 365 GT2 Plus 2, and the side elevation to the Aston Martin DBS. Problems continued with the engine, however. Blown head gaskets were common, and difficulties with deliveries of both block and cylinder head castings held back development. 175. In an exclusive article in Lotto Journal, writers Jean Mistral and Gilles Giraudot published a preview of the Monica's debut at the upcoming Salon de l'Auto in October, along with an interview with Tasteven. Among the things the founder revealed were his plans to build 400 cars per year. Tasteven decided that the car would debut at the Salon de l'Auto show in Paris in October 1971. 177. The car on display was powered by a Martin V8 and was called the Monica 350. Tasteven arranged to have a car raised to the 10th floor of a Paris hotel the day before the show, and then have it moved over to the salon, where the car was received enthusiastically. The morning after the day of the show, Lawrence was approached by Zora Arkustuntov, who asked if he could take the car for a drive. Lawrence handed him the keys. 177. Shortly after the Paris Auto Show, Tasteven phoned Lawrence and told him that he had arranged for the car to be evaluated by a team from Matra. A team of 6 from Matra drove the cars for over 3 hours straight and then met with Tasteven. The outcome of the evaluation was that the Matra engineers thought that the car should go into production, but only with a different engine. 178. Consideration was given to using an Aston Martin V8, but that option was too expensive to pursue. Lawrence was sent to the United States to meet with Ford, Chevrolet and Chrysler to arrange for a supply of engines. Ford and Chevrolet were quickly eliminated from the running, but Chrysler was very open to the idea. At the beginning of 1973, the decision was finally made to abandon the Martin V8 and adopt a North American engine, specifically the 5.6-liter, 5,563 cc, 340 Chrysler LA Series V8. To handle the extra weight, power steering was added, and the rear axle was beefed up. As an added bonus, Chrysler shipped the engines with an air conditioning compressor, so that feature was added at the same time. Other minor changes included fabricating the requisite motor mounts, having 2 new vents let into the fenders and, on later models, 2 additional grills fitted to the hood. During road testing, the new Chrysler engines began to fail. After investigating, it became apparent that the cause of these problems was that these engines were not designed to run for extended duration at the speeds possible on the continent. Lawrence returned to the States looking for the resources to remedy these problems. The engines destined for use in Monicas would all be specially tuned by Racer Brown in the United States. Modifications to the engines included a Racer Brown Stage 3 road camshaft with hydraulic lifters, an Edelbrock torquer intake manifold, a 4-barrel Holley R6909 750 CFM carburetor, a Chrysler Marine specification oil pump, Clavite shell bearings, forged true pistons, Marine specification valves, and a Fel-Pro race quality gasket set. 181 The compression ratio was 10.5 to 1. All of these changes combined to bring output to 285 bhp, 213 kilowatts at 5,400 revolutions per minute and 333 pounds-feet, 451 Nm at 4,000 revolutions per minute. It is reported that some cars may have been built with the larger 5.9-liter, 5,898 cc, 360 version of the Chrysler LA engine. These cars would have been designated Monica 590s. The dimensions attributed to this version by various sources differ, sometimes significantly, from those of the 560 model. In particular, the 590 is listed as being 630 mm shorter with a 100 mm shorter wheelbase and 140 kg heavier. It was also more powerful, the engine being rated at 315 bhp, 235 kilowatts, and 332 pounds-feet, 450 Nm. The revised and renamed Monica 560 made its world premiere at the Geneva Auto Show in March 1973. It would appear again at the Paris Auto Show in October. The car was priced at 164,000 francs, roughly $34,000 at the time, at a time when a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow cost 165,000 francs. After the Geneva show, Taste Event invited several racing drivers and automotive journalists to Paul Ricard's circuit, Le Castellet, to evaluate the new Chrysler-powered car. Among those there was driver, journalist Paul Fer, whom Taste Event invited to lend a hand in sorting out the car's handling. He would also be the person who wrote the semi-official obituary for the Monica car. A rapid succession of prototypes would be built to finalize the car. The cars at Le Castellet were numbers 8 and 9. Numbers 10 and 11 were built for crash testing and numbers 12, 13 and 14 came after. Prototype 14 was basically pre-production and would eventually be one of the cars Taste Event kept for his personal use. Taste Event had hired a director to get production underway at Balbini, but nothing was built for a year while the new director stalled and made changes to the car. Eventually Taste Event fired the directory and turned production over to Lawrence Toon again while he looked for a new director. 188 The car was also subsequently shown at the Earl's Court Auto Show.